Welcome to the Best Place to Work podcast, where we promise actionable tips from real business leaders on building amazing work cultures. Not tips from Google, but tips from the trenches of real-world businesses just like yours. Atmosera CEO Jon Thompson joins the podcast today. Atmosera is a Microsoft Azure solutions provider and was voted one of Oregon's most admired companies by Portland Business Journal. Now get ready because this episode is jam-packed with value. You might even have to pause it and take some notes as you're listening in. But Jon talks about joining the company and having to take drastic measures to turn around a very destructive culture. Listen up. Well, today I'm sitting down with Jon Thompson, who runs Atmosera, which is one Oregon's most admired companies in 2016, which is a pretty impressive feat, I must say. So thanks so much for being on, Jon.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Michael.
So tell me a little bit about Atmosera and how you guys were able to achieve that award. I guess maybe starting from kind of how the company got started to get you to where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. So Atmosera is a global managed Azure service provider. So we manage, we architect, deploy, and then manage public and private Microsoft Azure computing environments for companies all over the world. And the company was actually started in 1995, started out as an ISP, and then in the early 2000s moved into data centers, and then in 2010 into managed cloud based on the VMware platform. The company and another company were actually acquired. So two companies were acquired in early 2013 by a New York-based private equity firm. And then I joined about a little over a year after that transaction, so in the beginning of 2014. And what I found was, a company that was really, the combination of two companies of similar size and pedigree. They both had, I think, when I joined, there were about 48 employees. And what I found was a tremendous client base, very happy clients, great CSAT retention, and all of that. But internally, what I found was a company that was, run much like, it had a lot of improvement to do from a cultural perspective. I mean, certainly they've done a great job to get themselves into a position to be acquired by one of the more prominent private equity firms. But there was a lot of work to do from the people side and in the business. There was a lot of diving catches and reactionary stuff to create that great client experience. But it wasn't run as efficiently, and certainly the employees were not, I guess, as motivated or engaged as needed to be to really capture the market and do the things that we've now since done. So, what I found, sort of to set the foundation of this conversation, was what I found was a lot of learned helplessness, not a lot of A players. The A players that were here, that were doing a bulk of the work, had learned helplessness because there was no performance management with sort of the C and D players. And the example that was being shown by the executive team at the time was one that, my belief is everything emanates from the top, and you get the culture and the business that you deserve based on who you have at the top and what you're doing from a leadership perspective. And so it was one that it was a company that needed to go through a transition, and there was a lot of work to do.
Yeah, that's interesting. Though, can you unpack the learned helplessness a little bit, just to kind of how that was being demonstrated, and then kind of how you reverse that? Because that's really interesting. I think that's your journey from being acquired and then you joining the company and trying to make that reversal is even harder to do, right? I mean, you're coming in and having to deal with this culture and having to put in practices and process in place to really switch it around.
Yeah, no, I mean it's it's a bit of an art because you have to come in, you have to gain the respect of everybody in order to have that influence, and it does take time. I mean the biggest component of what we have done, or what myself and my team have done, is really been about organizational behavior and organizational change versus the adoption of new technology and transferring a business from a technical and all that kind of perspective. I mean, certainly there's aspects of what we've done on the technical side to change and elevate the business, but it's really been about culture change. And so, yeah, when I got here, basically the A players, that I could identify as A players, um, their mindset was, why? Why do I put in the extra time? Why do I go to the extra effort? Why? I mean, certainly these folks had the ability, they had the eagerness, that you could see it, but they just didn't have the faith, the trust in the management team. Me being new, that things were going to change. And previously, you had executive team members coming in late, not dealing or resolving issues. There was no performance management, meaning no one look, there was no individual plans or even sort of company wide. This is what success looks like, and let's define that down to the individual level, and then let's hold people responsible, for their actions, for their work effort, and all of that. And so you had, sort of the C and D players existing because there was no performance management, there were no consequences. So you had people, in real mission critical positions that would just not show up for work, or they would midday not, they would they would leave, and uh, and not tell anyone, and you didn't know if they were going to come back or not come back. And in the previous realm, that was tolerated, that was accepted, and so you can imagine someone that had everything, an A player, seeing that with no consequences for those types of people. They're just male. I mean, the A people are like, what's going on? And what really had happened, my guess is that, a majority of the, because what happens is, the A players leave, right? And they eventually
Yeah.
leave. And and so when I got here, I was fortunate. There were, a number of folks that were what I consider A players. They just hadn't been engaged, charged. The culture hadn't changed. Um, you know, to sort of empower them and get them back into performing at that A level. And once we took care of a number of things, those people started to blossom, started to take on more, sort of more leadership activities
Yeah.
within the organization. So,
Yeah. So, but before you unpack a little bit of the things that you guys did to reverse
yeah,
that, I'm interested in what your assessment is of how you get there. So, how does an organization, as they grow from 0 to 60, or they get up to 60 people, or it was 48 when
yeah,
you joined, like, what are the
yeah,
things that people are doing? What are the practices that create a culture like that? Because I don't think it's that uncommon for people to
no,
arrive at that place and say, oh, what are the pitfalls that they can avoid doing, things they can stop doing to prevent them from getting to that point?
yeah, yeah. No, and I mean, it's common, right? I mean, you have great leaders that can start companies and then are really, really good at in those environments of, let's say, sub 20 employees, sub 30 employees, and then once it gets up into the 30s to 50s to 100, it takes a different discipline, a different mindset, a different skill set to, I guess, manage and lead the number of variables that, come with a larger organization. And then, as you get into the 500 and into thousands, it's even additional skill sets, and um, each one of those phases is not for everybody, right? So I know plenty of people that only like to manage companies in that smaller range, but as I mentioned prior, my belief is, my experience is that everything emanates from the top, from the leadership perspective, from the CEO, from the executive team, and so I think that's where it starts, right? It starts with how is the CEO showing up every day? Is there a good strategic plan? Is there a good vision for the business? Is communication correct? Is the organization focused on what they need to be focused on? Is there performance management in place? So you sort of start with, what is the vision? Is there a solid strategic plan in place? Are the mechanisms in the business to translate that strategic plan into operational plans? Are those operational plans then supported by um, performance plans? And then is there an overall arching sort of cultural umbrella there, to create an intentional culture? Because there is a culture no matter what, and in my opinion, it's better to be intentional about it. So you are curating it to support what you're trying to build and your achievement of the vision. And so just being on top of that, understanding how to build that overall umbrella of an intentional culture to align with sort of that process of performance of plans, operational plans, supporting strategy to get to the vision. And there's a million places where that breaks down. Is as the company becomes much larger in terms of headcount, there's 1,000 more variables relative to the needs and wants and things that need to happen. Adding more people in theory means that the business is becoming more complex or growing. That diverts attention away. Maybe you slip on not getting together as an executive team. You start breaking down the communication barriers of the executive team, which then creates silos. And then all of a sudden you've got departments not working together. So there's just a ton of different areas where it can be where things can happen, where good cultures can break down, that affects the business performance and the ability to grow. So it's really staying disciplined and sharp on the corners around just the basic block and tackle things around, what's the vision, getting people excited, creating that intentional culture. What's the vision or the strategy rather, and how are you implementing that strategy into the operational side and the performance side, and then and then you got to figure out how to introduce meaning and fun into the organization, so it's people don't look at everything as just work, right?
Yeah. So that's a good point because it's, obviously it really boils down to discipline and doing those things. Everyone knows that you should be doing those things, right? I mean,
Right.
like
Yeah.
intuitively, you're
Yeah.
like, okay, yeah, I
Yeah.
should be doing a strategic
Yeah.
plan. I should have process in
Yeah.
place. But the interesting thing that last comment you made was then you have to have meaning and fun, which it seems
Yeah.
like that's a lot of that's an easy thing to try to add on later to make up for those other things. The lack of discipline is like, we'll just throw in like
Yeah.
a ping pong table or
Yeah.
we'll,
Yeah.
we'll
No.
get
No. No.
free beer in
Yeah.
the office. But like that
Yeah.
is set up to fail, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, that that kind of fun stuff it's good for some people and it's good for a moment, but the moment you leave the kegerator and you go back to work, then if things aren't, if people have learned helplessness or resentment, or they're discouraged, they don't feel like communication, or they're being heard, or things are being solved, decisions are being made, uh, the resentment is going to be there, right? And quite honestly, what at least I've found is if if you're not addressing all of the important things, those beer 30s and the ping pong table and the Pac-Man game and all that kind of stuff, they they don't get used and people don't show up, and or people show up for the wrong reasons. But yeah, that stuff is the easy stuff to do. It's what we've done right when I got here. I mean, my sort of where I started to address this, and I didn't come from the technology space, so I had a sort of a double. I not only did I have to come in and establish myself, and in a way that the organization trusted me, the employees respected me, and all of that, but I also had to come up to speed, which then supported the trust and the respect. But what I first did was, figured out what the heck we wanted to be when we grew up, right? Create a vision, and in my experience, creating a vision that has meaning beyond obviously a financial, definition, but that is something that has has more meaning than just an individual person, more meaning than just an individual company. But and, it's I call it creating a religion. And so you create something where people are truly inspired, truly they can get behind it, and it becomes something that is a real driver for the organization. So that we focused on the vision here was creating a category defining historically relevant business, and that business being focused on managed Azure on a global basis. But we want to create the category defining historically relevant business, meaning we define the category much like a Nike defines its category, or Google defines its category. There's no reason why we shouldn't be able to define the category for managed Azure services on a global basis, the same way that those companies do. And we want to create a historically relevant business, meaning that 5, 10, 15 years from now, we look back and say, "Holy, look, we were a part of that. Look at that. That's amazing." And from that, you can get people excited. It takes a while because you have to have solid action behind that commitment. You have to be true to your word, and things have to come to fruition based on what you've said. But we start there, and then you start. What we did was started creating what's called the atmosphere experience, and it's that umbrella from overarching intentional culture strategy, and it really governs how we recruit in the market, how we're perceived by folks, how we interview first day, first week, first month, when you come on board. um, what's your onboard plan. Everybody gets a guide, everyone gets a mentor. The guide is outside of your of your field of discipline, so you can ask questions that may look stupid. The mentor is within your discipline, so you've got sort of a go-to in your technical discipline. Everyone gets a what's called a passport, and then things are broken down. Activities are broken down into a variety of areas. Certainly there's the traditional compensation and benefits, and we have a number of different things under that category. There are rewards and recognitions. There's a category for that, and we do a whole bunch of different things relative to reward and recognition. Then there's what we call meaning, and there's things that we do as an organization and allow people to do individually that are outside of work, be it volunteering and doing things that are meaningful to them and meaningful to the organization. And then we have education, so there's a bunch of opportunities to get new certifications and training opportunities. So there's these 6 areas, and those who come in the first half of the year get put together in one cohort, and then those in the second half of the year you're in another cohort, and then you basically go through your experience here at Atmosera in your cohort, and there's competitions. There's every time you go to different classes and events, you get a stamp in your passport, much like you would if you were traveling to a new country. And so it's creating that intentionally curated high performance. So there's performance management obviously baked in throughout, but meaningful culture that makes it rewarding, fun, but performance driven here at what we with what we do. And it took a while to get people. It took probably a year and a half to get people kind of switching over. All of them. At first there's the early adopters and buyer, the people that buy in early, and then you have the bulk that are sitting back waiting to see if this guy Jon Thompson is actually going to do and say, do the things he says. And then over time, as more credibility and more success occurs, then the rest of the organization switches. And we've replaced probably 60% of the employees. I replaced the entire executive team. It wasn't my intention coming in here. In fact, the private equity firm acquired this company in part because of the executive team. So imagine me coming in and
Yeah.
going back to the private equity firm and saying, hey, I've given the head of sales here 4 months of my devoted attention, and it's just not going to work out. And so it took a little while to gain credibility with the private equity firm because they didn't really know me when they hired me. So but we did that, and we gave plenty of opportunity for folks to succeed. I build playbooks for everybody, which basically is no different. You build a playbook to play a basketball game or a football game against your competition for the upcoming week. You build a playbook. What are you going to run? How are you going to do it? What's going on? What's success look like? Roles, responsibilities. It's no different. So I build playbooks for everybody in my executive team. and we review that on a quarterly basis. But so it was a supportive management style, but ultimately, in that first year, 18 months, we ended up replacing probably 60% of the employees, and then the entire executive team,
Wow.
and
Wow.
and while still growing the business. And it was interesting because when you took when you gave opportunities for those people that were not showing up to work or leaving midday, when you gave them opportunities to be more successful, and then they continued to sort of act in the way that they had previously, then it was time to let them go. And all of a sudden you saw the A players see that this organization was going to be serious about performance and meritocracy and reward, but consequences as well. And those people, those A players, started escalating their performance, and just fed on each other. And from the executive team, I brought in people that had worked at much larger companies, like Oracle's and Xerox, and we've got a great executive team. Not that coming from a large company is a litmus test for success always, but these folks had two things beyond just being a great fit for our organization. But they had two things. One is they understood what it meant and what it looked like to operate at a much higher level, uh, and they had a lack of ego, so they could come into a smaller organization, understand that they didn't have the resources, let's say, of a SunGuard or an Oracle, and they could come in and roll their sleeves up and then help connect the dots for the organization to get up to that higher level of performance. And so, when in doing that, like I said, everything emanates from the top. We created an executive team that was a great, sort of a great leadership example for the rest of the organization to follow.
Wow, no, that I think you basically hit every little thing you guys did, which was very valuable.
Yeah,
Thank you so
sorry.
much.
Uh,
No,
of
let's take a short break. When we come back, I'd love to talk
course.
about kind of how you got these strategies and where you got them from.
Sure.
This podcast is proudly sponsored by Waypoint. If you want to get your team aligned and you want to go from herding cats to a well-oiled machine, and if you're sick of the annual review process, then check out Waypoint. It's an elegant tool built for leaders just like you to help you invest in your people and unlock their true potential. Head over to waypointhq.com to learn more. Yeah, so tell me a little bit about how you got this plan. So you
Mhm.
outlined like a ton of stuff that is
Yeah.
really gold, and we'll put that in the show notes. But
Yeah.
did you just have these ideas? Is this from experience you had? Did you guys work with a business coach? How did you arrive at some of these tactics that you guys used?
Yeah. 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 So, let's see. I guess the heart of it is so I went to business school at Northwestern, and my first semester there, I ended up taking an organizational behavior class. And at a Kellogg, I ended up graduating with a major in finance, management strategy, and then organizational behavior. And actually, the organizational behavior. So I like to understand the business from the financial side. That really is the driver of me understanding the nuts and bolts and the fundamentals of a business. But what has been the most important component of my career is what I've learned from an organizational behavior perspective in those classes, and then added to along my career. So the foundation was, I mean, I had no idea about people management, the organizational behavior, organizational strategies, until I went to Kellogg. I mean, I had practical real world experience, but I had no, prior to that, I hadn't put it into context. And so that was the foundation, and I absolutely loved it. And then throughout my career, as I gained ever increasing, I guess, leadership responsibilities, I would draw on sort of those learnings, and then just understand through my experience. So I helped start a company that got acquired by Enron, became Enron Broadband, and I ended up running Latin America for Enron Broadband, building uh, fiber optic routes all around Latin America. And there was a tremendous amount of learning relative to how do you organize teams, how do you implement projects, what not to do from a management perspective, what I saw from the Enron side, and all of that. And then the next adventure, I went into the food industry and acquired a company there. Same sort of thing. It was a very small company, and you start applying things that you have learned, and uh, you understand what needs to work and what doesn't work, and all of that. And then I guess the next biggest, I guess the most influential thing was my previous business prior to here was in the energy space, and I joined a very small business of about 40 employees, and I joined as the second in command, and the CEO at the time was a woman by the name of Lois Gordon, and she was a fundamental influencer for me in that. While she was not, I would say, she just had. While she wasn't a great manager, and she was one of those folks that could do a really good job with companies sort of up to the 40 employee side. When it got beyond that, it was sort of out of her comfort zone, and that was part of the reasons why I was brought in. But she was she was just a really good person around the discipline of the executive team, and everything emanates from the executive team, and the executive team needs to get together on a frequent basis with a regular cadence around strategy. She was the one that introduced me to the balanced scorecard approach to strategic planning, the importance of the practical importance, because I learned this back in school, and tangentially saw it in certainly the things I was doing prior, but here it was really drilled into me via Lois's work and leadership there. She was just an adamant proponent of every quarter we're getting together for 2 days, and we're going to focus on strategy, and we're going to and the balance scorecard, and you will present exactly what you've done over the last quarter and where you are in your KPIs, and it was great. And so I ended up actually taking over for Lois, and we grew that business nationwide to a couple hundred employees, and then sold it to a 80% owned public company and grew it to 1,400 employees. And all the time we used the same strategic planning approach, the balance scorecard, and the discipline that I'd learned from Lois all along as we grew the business. So, um, some key influencers in my life like Lois, and then the foundations from school back in the late '90s.
Yeah, and it sounds like the organizational behavior was a critical component to really understand people and motivations
Oh yeah,
and that sort of thing, which then was modeled by you with these tactics that people were very disciplined about using. You said,
yeah,
okay, yeah, I see that they're not just theoretical. I see how these are actually applied and where
yeah,
they succeeded or failed, and then I can use those to my advantage. So that's really,
yeah.
yeah, interesting.
No, I mean it was interesting. That first class I took at Kellogg, I had really no understanding of discipline of organizational behavior at all. And I remember hearing the term learned helplessness, or learning about it, and it struck me as so common sense, and so real, and like, so why do why don't more people try to address empowering the A, getting engaging the A players, and dealing with C and D players, uh, and it always struck me as odd, and I remember taking that class just absolutely excited about what I was learning, to the point where I turned it into one of my majors. And I remember getting, I had a lot of investment banking friends, and they were like, "Why are you studying that organizational behavior stuff?" And I was like, "Man, if you don't understand the people side of things, now maybe it's not applicable to investment banking, but I'm 100% sure it is. But uh, you know, uh, it, it's the number one thing that I've applied. I would say it's the number one discipline that has led to success in my career by far."
Wow. That's a pretty powerful
So
statement. So, no, thank you. I think you provided a lot of value. Like, very,
good.
very good. Thank you so much, John, for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks so much for listening. If If you found the show valuable, please give us some love on iTunes. But if there's any reason that you would rate us less than 5 stars, please let me know. Shoot me a note at mike@bestplacetoworkpodcast.com. Thanks.